The Phantom Stalker by Sean Parker. Read by the author. Natalie Zamora sat in the darkness of her room, perched on the edge of her bed. She slowly rocked back and forth. She glanced over at the Spartan conditions all around her. No windows or mirrors, just as she had requested. She rubbed her head wearily and let out a slight sigh. She could no longer tell if it was day or night. Everything had blurred together in her head. Her life wasn't always like this, in constant fear of the darkness in every corner of the room. No, her life used to be peaceful. It used to have purpose. Oh, how she wished she could return back to those innocent days. The days before she had encountered it. As Natalia pondered her fate, there was a sudden knock at her door that caused her to jerk her head quickly in the direction of the noise.
Natalia?
A gruff but comforting voice said on the other side of the door.
Are you decent, my dear?
Natalia hesitated for a moment, moving her long red hair from her eyes. Yes, I am. The door clicked open, allowing the bright light from the hallway to filter into her room. It slithered across the floor towards Natalia's dangling feet that she quickly lifted up, as if to retreat from it. Quickly, come in and shut the door, please, she yelled to the tall, middle-aged man that had entered.
As you desire,
the man said while making his way in and shutting the door behind him. Once again, the room was obscured in darkness.
I am Mr. Hobart. I spoke with you briefly before. Do you remember?
Your glasses. Natalia snapped up at the man harshly.
I'm sorry?
Hobart responded, confused. Your glasses. Did you remember to take them off and leave them outside? Her voice was nearly trembling.
Oh, yes, of course. I wouldn't forget such an important thing,
Hobart said, comfortingly.
After all, you responded to the mirrors in a most horrific fashion when you came here, so I figured you'd have a tart feeling towards any shiny objects. I removed them before I entered and left them with one of the staff.
You don't understand, Natalia said, lowering her face into her hands. You don't understand what it's like not being able to see your own reflection without fearing he will be there behind you, waiting. Hobart pulled up a wooden seat from the dark corner of the room and sat in front of Natalia with his legs crossed. He clasped his hands in front of him before speaking.
And who is this he you speak of? Someone from your past, perhaps?
Natalia laughed a hollow laugh. If only it was in my past. But you're here to listen to my story. Isn't that correct, Hobart?
If you desire to tell it, my dear,
Hobart said, trying to feign indifference. Natalia clasped her hands in her lap as she looked about the dark shadows in her room. It's funny, really. The Westport murders seem to be the only thing that I can remember anymore. Though, I know it wasn't even that long ago.
Indeed, you were one of the detectives assigned to the Westport killer case.
You do your homework well, Mr. Hobart. I was so excited when I first got assigned the case. Natalia's eyes seemed to light up in the darkness. But if only I had known what was to happen. I wish I'd never taken the case. I wish I had never encountered the Phantom Stalker.
Go on and enlighten me, dear,
Hobart said calmly as Natalia began her story. Westport was never a good town. It had its share of violence and gang problems, but never something of this level. When the Westport murders began, people wrote them off as botched burglaries. But as the body counts began to rise, and the bizarre details of the crime scenes became public knowledge, the people of Westport began to live under a veil of fear, and it was the job of the police departments to find out who was the killer. Like any good detectives, we had to establish a pattern in the killer's actions, and there were quite a few constants. The first, most obvious one was that all of the victims were 20 to 40-year-old women, usually, but not always beautiful, usually, but not always single. Second, the killer always attacked when the women were alone, and most commonly in their houses, apartments, or cars. Third, and this one was confusing to us at first, the victims' homes were usually devoid of mirrors, TVs, windows, or anything that could be reflective. Usually the TVs were found busted in a nearby dumpster, or the mirrors were shattered in the walls and bathrooms when they could not be removed. Furthermore, many of the homes had blankets nailed over the windows. Then there were the nonsensical anomalies of the murders. One of the most disturbing aspects was that some of the victims had been killed behind locked doors and windows with no sign of tampering. One such incident was in the 5th story of an apartment building that was locked down at night, and you had to be let in by a doorman. Another was the home of a middle-aged woman that had nailed all of the doors and windows shut from the inside. We were completely baffled by that one, as you can understand. In one house, we found the words, "Don't turn around," scribbled all over the walls in the victim's own handwriting, as if she had to constantly remind herself not to let her guard down. In another, we found the victim's dead body in her shower. Her body had become bloated from prolonged water exposure. The words, "The Phantom Stalker," had been cut into her chest by a weapon that we never found. And then there was the killer's method of execution. Oh God, every one of the victims had been violently strangled. Usually, their mouths were gaping open in sheer terror. I have seen plenty of murder victims in my career, you understand, Mr. Hobart, but never had I seen such a look of dread or terror as I had across their faces. I always cringed thinking about what they must have seen in their last moments of life, what all-consuming evil they had encountered. If you ever watched any of those overhyped crime scene shows on TV, you would know that when a victim is strangled, there's often some sort of biological evidence. The killer leaves fingerprints on the victim's neck. The victim gouges the killer's flesh, leaving tissue under their nails. Or the killer leaves hair, or saliva, or blood, or something on the victim's body that we could use to identify who was doing these most grisly acts. But with the Westport Strangler, that was never the case. Not in over 36 murders. It was on the last crime scene that I investigated that the true nature of the killer became apparent to me. We had received a call in the Woodgate apartment complex that one of the residents had started screaming hysterically in the middle of the night. As you can understand, many of the neighbors were concerned. What with the horrible reports they had seen on the news night after night after night. Of course, it was no surprise when the officers that were sent to investigate found no answer whenever they knocked on her door and were forced to kick her door in. Once inside, they realized it was another victim of the Westport Strangler, and that is when me and my partner, Detective Chalmers, were sent to investigate. I remember walking down the dreary, run-down hallway of the Woodgate building. Many of the neighbors were standing at their doors with a look of dread across their faces. They knew what had happened. It was front-page news almost every day now, but none of them ever thought it would happen in their own building. I remember passing a young single mother and her 2 children. Neither child could have been more than 5 or 6 years old. As I walked by, I heard one of the girls cry out, "Mommy, you said monsters aren't real." That, of course, struck me deep down inside, you understand, Mr. Hobart. I mean, I've never been a mother. I couldn't with my career and all. But I wanted to tell the little girl that even if there are monsters, there were angels, like myself, that are here to protect. To me, it only added an extra sense of urgency to stop this killer and finally allow everyone in the city to sleep peacefully at night. As I got to the victim's apartments, I was already prepared for what I knew was going to be a most horrible sight. Steeling myself, I walked into the living room, and as I suspected, all of the windows had blankets nailed over them. The only TV in the room had been busted up and placed face down. The shards of glass on the floor had bloody footprints on it, presumably from the victim walking across it. Judging by the blood across the carpet, she had spent many nights pacing back and forth, waiting until morning, the poor girl. Already, the boys were dusting the place down and taking pictures. All the good it would do them. The killer never left prints. Never. None of them greeted me. It was business as usual. Besides, we had seen each other plenty of times already, and I think they knew. We were just wasting our time searching for evidence that didn't exist. The kitchen was a horrible mess, as to be expected, given the living room's state. All of the silverware had been placed in brown paper bags and replaced with plasticware. There were open containers of microwavable food that had been eaten raw, as the microwave's glass window had been shattered, making it inoperable. Judging by the flies buzzing about the apartments and the maggots crawling through the perishable meats that had been left out on the counter, it had been several days since the victim had expired. Curiously, I also noticed that anything that could have been metallic, such as canned foods, was lacking. Walking past the restroom, I could already tell the mirror had been shattered. Most of the major glass pieces were missing, except a few small slivers that had been missed. No surprises yet, I thought. This is the exact pattern of every victim's home. A schizophrenic mess, devoid of anything reflective. As I made my way into the victim's room, where the murder took place, it seemed, I observed that most of the furniture had been toppled over. A bookshelf had been overturned, and the computer monitor had been busted and thrown on its side. The victim was laying on her bed, her body contorted into a most horrible position. She was half naked, wearing only a tank top and underwear, though there was never any evidence to suggest the killer tried to rape any of the victims, so this was most likely her normal nightwear. Half of her comforter was thrown over her body, her head was tilted back, and I could clearly see dark black bruises on her neck. Her eyes were bugged out and her tongue was hanging from her mouth, as if she was trying to lick her last breath from the air. Despite this, she was still a cute, petite, 20-something blonde. She had her whole life ahead of her, and in an instant, this monster had taken it from her in a single night. There was another agent in the room, taking pictures of her for evidence. His name was Hannigan. I never liked him much. He was hunched over her body, snapping shot after shot after shot, his camera light flashing with every click, lighting up the darkened room.
"That's it, baby. Sell it to the camera,"
he said mockingly.
"Show me your pouty face. That's it. Okay, now you're angry. Show me angry eyes."
He continued to snap pictures and joke. I finally coughed, making my presence known. Hannigan almost jumped as he tilted his head over in my direction.
Detective Zamori,"
he said, embarrassed.
I didn't know you were."
"Save it," I interrupted him. "You're done here. I'm certain you have enough pictures." I stood to the side of the door, motioning him to pass. He lowered both his camera and his head as he tried to walk by me, but before I let him leave, I grabbed hold of his arm. "You know, that was someone's daughter. I understand you have a 15-year-old girl. Isn't that right, Hannigan? That could have been her. So show some respect," I said sternly, allowing the full effect of my intimidating green eyes to bore into him. I stared at Hannigan for some time before releasing him, and he nodded his head.
Yeah, ma'am,"
he said, then made his way back out of the room. However, I heard him mumble something under his breath that I'll just assume, for his sake, was runt. I would of course make an incident report on him tomorrow, but at the moment, I only cared about the victim. I stared down into her lifeless, fear-stricken eyes, and in that instant I saw everything that she could have been and never will be, and I felt an anger rushing up inside of me. I was always told that I was too emotional when it came to my work, and that this was not the job to have emotions. But you must understand, Mr. Hobart, it was my passion, my lust for justice, that made me choose this profession to begin with. I was lost in thought, staring down at her body. That's when I could have swore I heard a voice whispering behind me, though it sounded like a faint, inaudible whisper. I couldn't make out what it had said. It seemed like a distant song or melody. I turned around, but saw no one. That is, until Greg Chalmers entered the room, holding what appeared to be a journal. With his other hand, he quickly removed his glasses to make himself seem more attractive to me.
It didn't work.
Hey, good morning, sunshine, Detective Chalmers said, abnormally cheerful considering where we were. It's late afternoon, Chalmers, I said bluntly.
Well then,
Good late afternoon then, he chuckled. Did you have anything relevant to say to me, Chalmers? Chalmers hesitated for a moment, then looked down at the journal.
Yeah. And you responded to me, so...
Moot question. No. I mean before you came in here, did you say something? Like maybe a little song or something, even if it was under your breath?
No, I wasn't singing any song. If you heard something, it could have been somebody's radio. We are in an apartment complex, after all, and these walls are pretty thin.
Greg said, confused. Never mind then, Greg. What's that? I motioned towards the journal in his hand.
Aha! This, now you see it.
Well, it seems our victim kept a journal before her death. Unlike the other victims, we have something to go off of for a change. But I've got to admit, there's some pretty trippy shit in here. I don't think we can make any use of it, but it's worth a read. Yes. Well, maybe I can glean something from it, Chalmers, I said, lifting out my hand.
Yeah. You're always better at this sort of thing than I am. You were able to see things that I couldn't, like every other case. Maybe you can find something in here that I missed. Give it a shot,
Chalmers said, as he handed me the journal.
But, I wouldn't suggest starting until, January 12th. Before that, it's just a bunch of young girl crush talk. It has nothing to do with this case, I'm certain. Unless, of course, you want to hear her drone on and on and on about her crush on Dustin Bieber.
I shook my head with a slight smile as I took the journal from him. Greg crossed his arms and glanced past me over at the body as I began to read. January 12th. I had this really weird incident happen to me today. I was passing by the house of Elizabeth Shinto, the one of the most recent victims of that strangler everyone keeps talking about. I knew it was her house because I could see her being taken out on a body bag. Ew, gross. Anyway, while I passed her house, I could swear I heard something off in the distance, even though I had my windows up. Kind of creeped me out a little. Anyway, I got a date with Billy tonight. Talk to you later, journal. January 13th. The date with Billy went well. Hopefully it's the start of many more. Though, while I was walking to my car, I swear I heard some voice behind me. I couldn't quite make it out. Maybe I was hearing someone talking in the restaurant, but it just kind of freaked me out. Maybe I shouldn't have passed that Shinto girl's house. I think I freaked myself out just a little bit. January 13th. Again.
Okay. It's about 11 o'clock my time, and I woke up thinking I heard that voice again. I'm really getting weirded out. I didn't call the cops or anything because I think it might have just been, a dream. And there was nothing out of the ordinary in the apartments. I just thought I'd write it down, to relax my nerves. Okay, bye, journal.
January 14th.
Okay, I'm really freaking out. When I was brushing my teeth this morning, I heard that voice again this time. I know I'm not imagining things now. The voice was singing this sort of creepy rhyme about getting me and not turning around. When I looked up into my bathroom mirror, I swear I could see something standing in my living room. I screamed, and I ran out of my apartment. My neighbor Hank, he quickly came to my aid. I think he's got a crush on me. Poor guy. He's not my type, though. After checking my apartments, he said I just got spooked out by my coat rack or something like that. But I know what my coat rack looks like.
January 15th. Guess what? I got another date with Billy. We're going to catch a movie and then, maybe see what happens from there. January 18th. Dear Journal, Billy says he can't see me anymore until I get my baggage taken care of. Why won't anyone believe me? Even Hank's starting to act like I'm crazy. I swear, every time I see it, it's just a little bit closer now. That thing. I'm starting to get really scared, and everyone thinks I'm just crazy. I wish Mom were still alive. January 20th. Got fired today at work. I can't work out in public anymore. Can't chance seeing it. It's so close now. It was fine when it was still far away, but every time I see it, it's just a little bit closer now, and that smile, oh my God, it just keeps getting wider and wider, like it can't wait to get a hold of me. January 21st. Every time I see it, it's a little bit closer now. It's like some sort of game. It wants to play with me. Every time it gets me to look at it, it gets a little bit closer. So I try not to look at it, but then I hear it right behind me. So I turn and want to look at it, and it gets a little bit closer. So I try not to look behind me. Then it sings, and I want to turn and look at it, and then it gets a little bit closer. January 22nd. The apartment manager. Well, he told me I have 30 days to get out due to repeated noise complaints. I guess people heard me breaking my mirrors last night. No one will help me. I don't know what to do. Please somebody help me. Journal, will you help me? January 23rd. I rolled over in my sleep and opened my eyes when I heard something. It was right there over my bed, just staring down at me, hovering. I sat up and started screaming until it disappeared. But now I feel like it is always behind me, that breath on the back of my neck. I cannot see it again. No date. There is someone behind me. There's someone behind me. There's someone behind me. There's someone behind me. This went on for over 9 pages, each sentence becoming more and more frantic until the final sentence that ended with just someone. This was the final entry in her journal. Closing the journal, I looked over at Detective Chalmers, perplexed by what I had just read. He saw the look on my face and nodded. It appeared that he felt the same way. So, what do you make of it? Chalmers asked me. I have no idea. I think our victim might have suffered some sort of mental illness, just like several of the others. It's not the first time one of the victims has exhibited weird behavior before being murdered. Maybe this particular killer targets sick girls, I said, mostly just trying to make sense out of the gibberish I had read in her journal. Yeah, maybe, Chalmers said, deep in thought. I smirked at him. Please, don't tell me you think it was some sort of phantom killer that's been doing all of this, Chalmers. Chalmers looked legitimately shocked by my accusation. No, of course not, Natalia. Of course not. It's just, as a detective, I'm inclined to follow leads, and the journal does explain a few constants in the crime scenes, he said meekly. I shook my head. Listen, Chalmers, we've been on this case for months now. I know it seems like our guy has supernatural abilities, but I think you'll find in the end he's just another maniac, causing mass hysteria in his victims and the city as a whole. That's why it's so important to take him down. This case is going to make or break our careers. You understand that, right? There was a long, uneasy silence between me and Chalmers, for we both knew just how important this case was. Just then, the ambulance workers came into the room with the gurney and the body bag. We left the room so they could do their job. It was as we exited the crime scene that we could see that almost everyone else had left, except for an officer stationed at the front door of the apartment. I turned back towards Greg. You probably noticed the file cabinets in her room, like I did, being the upstanding detective that you are, I said, trying to get a rise out of Detective Chalmers. I want you to go through it and see if you can find a psychologist she might have been seeing. Perhaps these women all shared the same doctor. I want you to also question the neighbors and see if they saw anyone ever coming or going from her apartment. When I get home, I'm going to call her mother. I know she's been through a lot considering the loss of her daughter, but she might have some useful information for us. I'm particularly curious if she knows anything about this Billy that was mentioned in the journal. Yeah. Hey, that's good thinking, Natalia, Detective Chalmers said as he nodded enthusiastically. Also, I find it's too hard of a coincidence that she just happened to be driving by Elizabeth Shinto's house. There might be some sort of connection with the killer's past victims and its potential future victims. I'm certain that's relevant somehow. Yeah, that sounds like a plan, Natalia, Chalmers said, as if plotting something. Hey, later tonight, maybe we can go get coffee and compare notes? He smiled sheepishly. I smiled and quickly shot him down. We can compare notes tomorrow, Detective Chalmers. In the office. Detective Chalmers laughed. A hollow laugh. Yeah. Okay, Natalia, he said as I turned to walk down the hall. As I left the apartment, I made it a point to take the stairs because that was the most likely way the killer had entered and left. In the stairwell, I noticed that the building was quite old and in a state of most horrible disrepair. I could see roaches scuttling out of the cracks in the walls, the paint chipping horribly. The lights in the stairwell flickered on and off every few seconds. As I made my way down the steps, every one of them creaked and groaned under my weight. Once at the bottom of the stairwell, I pushed open the door that led into the hallway, which eventually led to the exits to the complex. And then, it was as I was almost near the entrance that I heard it again. The same voice I had heard in the victim's room. It was faint, but clearly audible this time. A rhyme or song, being sang in a raspy, disturbed voice that sounded warped somehow. There is someone behind you. Don't turn around or they might find you. I instinctively grabbed the firearm at my side and spun around, staring down the hallway. I could see it on the other end. It was standing in the still closing door of the stairwell. It was some sort of shape. I could see what appeared to be a shadowy man, but something just wasn't right about it. Though I couldn't quite place what. Already, the stairwell door was closing and obscuring the figure from my vision. "You, stop!" I shouted and began to run down the hallway, even as the door shut. It took me only seconds to make my way back to the stairwell door and kick it open. I immediately began to ascend the steps of the stairwell, looking up as I did, expecting the figure to be standing on the next landing. The steps creaked and groaned under me as if they could give at any moment, but I didn't hesitate. Could the killer have been that foolish to taunt me in a building with my men stationed throughout it? He couldn't have gotten that far ahead of me. He was only a few seconds away at most. Already, I was at the doorway to the second floor as I rammed my shoulder into it, flinging the door open. This startled Greg and the night guard, who were both in mid-conversation. They stared over at me with a perplexed look in their eyes as I began to run down the hall towards them.
Natalia?
Greg said. "Where is he?" I shouted at both of them.
Where's who, Detective Zamora?
The night guardsman said. I was startled at hearing this. "The man that would have come from the stairwell. This building is only 2 stories, and I know he didn't get by me," I yelled, severely agitated.
"Natalia," Greg said woefully, "nobody's come from the stairwell except you."
I began to shake my head in disbelief.
No, that's not possible. I would have seen him try and get past me in the stairwell. That's not possible, Greg. Hold up, who are you talking about?
Detective Chalmers said, lifting up his hands to try and calm me down. I stared at both the officer and Detective Chalmers before regaining my composure and speaking. "Not 2 minutes ago, somebody taunted me, then disappeared into the stairwell. When I chased after him, I came up here, which is the only place he could have gone. And the 2 of you didn't see anything." Both of them shook their heads as I dreaded they would. I glanced up to see the gurney being escorted out of the victim's room with a fresh body bag on it. The ambulance workers, like the boatmen at the River Styx, didn't say anything as they passed us and continued on towards the elevator.
"Natalia, is it possible you just saw something that wasn't there?"
Greg said, trying to be as soft-spoken as possible.
Yeah, there's no way somebody would have got past both of us, Detective Zamora,
the guardsman said. I know what I saw. I snapped back, though inside I was beginning to suspect I might have allowed the atmosphere of this place to get to me.
"I can search the building, maybe try and..."
Greg began, but I interrupted him quickly. "Don't bother. I don't see how someone could have got by you and me. The stairwell door is just right there," I said in defeat, though I was loath to admit that I could have just imagined the entire thing.
"Okay, so what do you want us to do now?"
"We continue with the original plan. I'm heading back home. Call me if anything comes up. And search the building thoroughly."
"Yes, ma'am,"
Greg said, a smirk across his face. Making my way back down the stairwell, I was particularly adamant about my surroundings. Was there perhaps a storage closet I had missed? A hole in the wall that could have been exploited? No, there was nothing. I could see no logical way someone could have hid from me in here, though now I felt a sense of unease in the stairwell, so I was quick to descend the creaky steps and exit it at the bottom level. As I walked down the hall of the main floor, I was half expecting to hear the voice again, mocking me. I even glanced back at the shutting stairwell door, waiting for the figure to be standing there once again. As the door shut, I could see nothing and decided to make my way out of the building. As I stepped into the parking lot, I could see the sun was setting over the skyline of buildings, off in the distance. I quickly made my way to my car and unlocked the door. As I drove away from the Woodgate apartment complex, I began to replay the strange occurrences of the case through my head. All the women had been observed to be extremely delusional and paranoid towards the end of their lives. Every woman had destroyed all the mirrors in their house, and every woman had been strangled to death most violently. Perhaps the disturbing and grisly nature of the case had got to me, and I was beginning to see and imagine things. This, of course, only increased my resolve to catch the murderer. I decided to turn on my radio so I could clear my head and relax some. As I turned on the tuner, I could hear static coming over the speakers. The static hissed and creaked in a way I wasn't used to. I thought I had my radio on the right station, though perhaps I was just in an area with poor reception. It was a poor part of the city, after all. But as I tried to adjust the channels, there suddenly came a horrible rasping, crackling voice over the speakers.
There is someone behind you. Don't turn around, or they might find you.
Instinctively, I looked into my rear view mirror and could see a figure standing in the middle of the road behind me. He was less than 100 feet away and somewhat obscured by mist or smoke or something along that line. I quickly slammed on my brakes, almost headbutting my steering wheel as I did. The car screeched to a horrible halt. I jerked my head over my shoulder and stared down the road behind me. But strangely, there was no sign of the figure. Putting my car in park, I jumped out. In retrospect, I know I should have asked for backup, but after what had happened at Woodgate, I was too proud for that, and I couldn't afford to be reduced in the eyes of my peers again. I drew my sidearm and began to walk down the road. This was by far the worst place to be a cop and by yourself, especially with the impending darkness of night. Already, I could see the street lamps begin to flicker on, many of them in a state of horrible disrepair. The surrounding buildings were old and dilapidated, and I could feel eyes watching me from the dark corners and windows all around. When I made it to the part of the road where I thought I had seen the man, I began to look around for a place he could have gone. This area was an urban sprawl of rundown buildings. There were dozens of places the entity could have gone. No, don't call it an entity. Call it a man, I thought to myself. A man, nothing more. But then again, how could it have taken over my radio like that? No. This was just paranoid, delusional talk. There was some sort of trick at work here, and I was determined to figure out what. Glancing to the side of the road, I could see a back alley between a group of two-story houses. That would have been the most logical place for the killer to have retreated to. I left my car in the middle of the road and began to walk down the gravel-covered alley. My gun was well drawn as I crept down the alleyway. The place was strewn with trash cans, crates, and garbage. Every niche a potential place to launch an ambush. I looked up at the windows of the houses on either side of me, looking for one that might have been open, that someone could have perhaps jumped into or out of. I sensed movements off to the side and lifted my gun in its direction. It was just a calico cat,
with a dead mouse in its mouth. I stared at it for a moment, and it stared at me, before it jumped off its crate and scampered down the road. Then I heard laughter, not from behind me, but from up ahead. I began to walk quickly towards the sound of the laughter. It was 2 voices, neither of them as deep or sinister to be my stalker. As I made my way closer, I could see 2 Caucasian kids, mid-teens by the look of them. They had a joint that they were passing between them. One of them was quick to catch a glimpse of me and my badge.
"Ah, shit, bro,"
he yelled to his friend. The other one turned around, and seeing me standing with my gun drawn, he quickly flicked his joint into a nearby trash can.
"Oh, hello, officer,"
he said, lifting up his hands and backing away from me nervously. "Did somebody pass through here?" I barked at the kids.
What?
One of the kids said, obviously freaked out. "Did either of you kids see someone pass through here?" No, ma'am," the more calm one said. "Just you." I lowered my gun, seeing that I was intimidating the kids unnecessarily, though I was still glancing about the alley and the surrounding buildings. The 2 stoners each looked at each other, more confused that I seemed to be concerned with the shadows and nooks of the alley than them. Finally, the brave one spoke up.
So, are you going to arrest us or something, ma'am?
I was still glancing about the alley. No, I said. "You kids go home. You have no idea what could be out this night." Yes, ma'am," the kids said, and began to walk past me. "One more thing," I said, causing them to freeze in place.
Yeah?
The timid one said, shaking. I bantied myself up before speaking. "Taking non-prescription marijuana is illegal. I'm willing to bet you both have more than enough on you to arrest the 2 of you. Now go on," I said, ever the cop. The 2 nodded their head in unison, then turned and rushed down the alleyway and disappeared around the corner. Once they were gone and I was alone again, I felt a sudden sensation of dread wash over me. The alley seemed to transform into a more woeful place, and I could swear I was being watched. I suddenly felt this great urge to leave and get back to my car. I slowly turned around and began to walk towards the road. I could see the dark shadows of the surrounding buildings looming over me now, like sinister golems waiting to pounce. The light was gone, except for the flickering of televisions from the nearby buildings. Then I felt my heart begin to pound as I heard that blasted, raspy voice again. It was far louder than before and chilled me to my spine.
There is someone behind you. Don't turn around or they might find you.
I quickly spun around with my weapon drawn. I could see the figure standing down the alley. This time, the figure was close enough that I could clearly make out some features on it. Its eyes were like white orbs with black needle-like pupils. Its face was contorted into a rictus-like grin. Its teeth almost a perfect white in contrast to its black wraith-like form. Its coat, or cloak or whatever it was wearing, billowed in tatters across its body, and it seemed to be half shrouded in black shadows. In the face of the seemingly illogical and impossible, I screamed and began to fire at the thing. My gun crackled, echoing off the buildings. I wasn't sure if I had hit the thing or not as the shadows enveloped it, and it suddenly was gone. I stumbled backwards and stared into the darkness of the alley, and then realized that the darkness itself seemed to be creeping towards me as if alive. I could see the blackness enveloping the crud across the ground, wadded pieces of paper, cans, and other various trash were coated in the encroaching shadows and consumed. The shadows continued to snake across the ground towards my feet. I suddenly turned and began to run down the alley, even as the surrounding light around me began to disappear. My breath quickened, and my heart began to pound as I fell over some trash cans, skinning my knees before rising back up to my feet and sprinting again. I finally made it to the road and the safety of the streetlights as I fell down with my hands across my knees and began to pant and recatch my breath. As I looked around the surrounding buildings, I could see people standing at their doors. Even the potheads were on their porch with their mother. They were all staring at me, and I suddenly realized that I had not holstered my gun. I quickly put my weapon back into my coat and began to walk down the streets towards my car. Damn, I thought to myself, someone surely called the cops by now. They'll be here any minute, and I'll have to explain why there were shots fired. Or was I going to tell them that I had seen a ghost or a phantom and tried to kill it? They would have my badge. I would be ruined. I had to get out of here. Before they showed up, I had to. My car. Where was my car? I stared down the empty road, looking at where my car was supposed to be. Stupid, stupid, stupid. I left my car parked in the middle of the road, with the keys in it, in a bad part of town. What did I think was going to happen? It didn't matter. I could already hear the sirens off in the distance. Frantically, I began to run down the street. This was great, I thought. A cop running from the cops. I quickly made my way to a cross-section where I could see an old run-down gas station. No sooner did I step inside when I saw two squad cars blur by, their red and blues flashing. The gas station clerk looked up from his magazine, then nodded at me, before looking back down at it. I quickly pulled out my cell phone and called in a cab. I'd have to make a report of the stolen vehicle tomorrow. I'd come up with some sort of story by then. I was certain of that. While waiting for the cab, I regained my composure in the restroom. I locked the door behind me and began to pour warm water into the sink. What was happening to me? I thought. What was going on with my mind? Was I going insane? It was just like the journal. I pulled it out of my coat pocket and reread some of the entries. Every time I see it, the thing gets a little closer, if I can just keep from seeing it. I snapped the book shut and shook my head before placing the book back into my pocket. It seemed so ludicrous when I had read it a few hours earlier, but now I was beginning to doubt my own concept of reality. I cupped my hands in the warm water and splashed it against my face.
There is someone behind you. Don't turn around or they might find you.
The voice hissed behind me. I suddenly snapped my head up and stared into the mirror and could see the black, wraith-like figure no more than 8 feet away from me, standing in front of the bathroom wall. Its mouth was so wide now that it wasn't possible for a human to grin like that. In fact, it seemed to have more teeth than possible. Its eyes were gleaming with sadistic pleasure. I spun around to confront it. "Bastard!" I screamed. "You bastard!" But there was nothing there. I glanced back into the mirror. Nothing. Then there came a tapping at the graffiti-covered bathroom door.
"Ma'am,"
the store clerk said.
"are you okay?"
I gripped my hand onto my chest. Yes, I responded, though I didn't feel like I really was.
"Good. Well, your ride's here."
I sat in the back of the cab, watching the lights go by. I had just given my address to the young, handsome Arab driver. He tried to make small talk with me, but given what I had just been through, I wasn't very chatty. Sensing this, he turned on the radio, and for a moment I feared I would hear the voice again, though what I heard instead was nearly as bad.
Sarah McCready has been identified as the latest victim of the Westport Strangler, according to authorities. Her body was found yesterday in the Woodgate apartment complex, bringing the death toll up to 37. With an increasingly fearful city and no strong leads, according to the police department, the citizens of Westport are beginning to ask, how many more must die before the killer is apprehended? When questioned about how the killer was able to strike so often without any suspects, the police department made this official statement. He's very crafty. Despite this, many citizens are beginning to lose faith in the investigation, as well as the investigation's head's detective, Natalie Zamora.
Turn that shit off, I yelled, and the driver respectfully did as I asked. So sorry, madame. I forget how scary it must be for a pretty young girl like yourself to be living in Westport during this time, he said, flirtingly. You have no clue, I said, as we pulled up to my country home. My house had been built in the late 1800s and was once a farmhouse. As such, it was large, dark, and very secluded. I had originally bought it thinking I would one day raise a family in it, though as my career excelled, and I got promotions in a field not known to be fair towards women, I never settled down. Now I was left living in a big, ancient, scary house in the middle of the woods, though it never had bothered me before, not until tonight. After giving the driver a generous tip, and sending him on his way, I made my way up to the ominous steps of my house. The porch was large and foreboding, though it was still a greater comfort than the surrounding woods. I could feel as though eyes were still watching me from the darkness of the tree line, and I felt a tremor run through my body. Blame it on the cold night, I thought. I walked up the creaking wooden stairs and made my way to the door. Then, I realized my house keys were on the same keychain as my car keys. I had locked myself out. I took a few steps back away from the door. Had this been a newer house, I could have easily kicked the door in, but this was solid oak, and I was barely 130 pounds last time I checked the scale. I stood there, staring at the door, pondering my next move. What could I do to get in my house? Surely there was a window or something I had left unlocked. Wait a minute. What was that noise?
There is someone behind you. Don't turn around or they might find you.
The voice sang behind me. It was close now. Very close. Don't turn around, I thought. Just don't turn around. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck begin to stand on end. I could almost swear I felt hot breath against the nape of my neck. But still, I managed to hold my ground and stare over at the closed wooden door in front of me. I knew that turning around would bring the Phantom Stalker one step closer to me, and unlike its other victims, I knew what would happen once it got to me. I could feel my hands trembling, A bead of sweat ran down my cheek, and I had to fight my natural biological instincts to turn around and face the threats that I knew would be standing there. I remained for many minutes before I felt comfortable in moving. It must only have so much time for you to turn around and see it, for when I turned to make my way down the steps of my porch, there was nothing there. I began to walk around the side of my house and check my windows. I was always careless and left 1 or 2 windows unlocked. I always thought that was stupid of me. I investigated many cases where women had been raped or murdered, all because they had forgotten to lock that 1 window. But tonight it seemed that carelessness was going to work in my favor. The window to my room was unlocked. I liked to have a cool breeze blow on my face at night, and I guess I had forgotten to lock it. I hoisted myself up on the windowsill and began to crawl in. As I was halfway in with my belly straddling the windowsill, I suddenly heard that voice again, which at this point had become like pinpricks into my soul.
There is someone behind you. Don't turn around or they might find you.
Shit, just get into the house. Don't look at it, I thought to myself, while trying to pull myself the rest of the way in. As I looked up, however, I was startled to see someone already in my room. No, it wasn't someone. It was my own blasted reflection from the dresser mirror. And behind me, I mean right behind me, was the Phantom Stalker. His mouth so wide that it seemed his face was nothing more than an enormous grin, with 2 small white eyes with the black, horrible pupils. I thrashed about frantically and fell face first onto the hard wood floor. I rose quickly, then spun around towards the window, but unlike before, the stalker was still there staring at me. I slammed the window quickly shut and stumbled backwards, falling onto my bed. As I stared at the fading apparition, I could see a look of amusement on its face. He had a look of extreme demonic anticipation. Finally, the stalker faded completely out of view. Though it was so close now, I couldn't afford another glance. I just couldn't. Then, in the worst possible timing, my phone rang and I almost jumped out of my skin. I stared at my cell phone, the words Craig Chalmers in parentheses with his number underneath it. Normally I dreaded speaking to him on the phone, but that night I flipped my phone open and shouted, Greg! Greg seemed startled by my joy. Natalia? Are you okay? He said. No, I'm not. I half cried. Natalia, what's wrong? Greg, I need you to get over to my house right away. I think I may be losing my mind. What? Greg said, concerned. Listen, it's true. It's all true. Our killer is some sort of phantom killer, for lack of a better word, and I'm its next target. I must have been in half hysterics as Craig responded to me. Look, Natalia, calm down. I'm on my way, okay? I suddenly glanced back over at my own reflection in the mirror. Okay, just hurry. I have to take care of a few things, real quick. What do you mean, Natalia? No, wait, stay on the line. Goodbye, Craig, I said, turning off the phone. I had to take care of the mirrors. No, not just the mirrors. Everything that was shiny in the house. I had to destroy them all. I couldn't chance seeing it again. Now I understood why the women had destroyed every shiny object in their house. It was the only way they could prevent themselves from accidentally seeing the Phantom Stalker for that final, fatal time.
I pulled out a pair of earplugs I kept by my bed to help me sleep at night and put them in my ears. I reasoned if I didn't hear the song, that goddamn song, then maybe that would disrupt the curse. After placing the earplugs in, I made my way to the closet where I kept a baseball bat. I always was a tomboy. Then I turned towards the mirror. I didn't dare look into it directly. I just swung in its direction and felt the glass shatter and fall across the floor. "You're not going to get me, do you hear?" I screamed and could hear my own voice even with the earplugs on. I turned towards the window and shattered the glass there as well. Slivers of glass fell across my face, lacerating my cheeks and causing blood to streak down my chin. Then I realized that the picture frames all along the walls were also shiny, so I began to pull them from the walls and throw them face down on the wooden floor. I proceeded methodically through the rest of the house, not turning on a single light. I reasoned that maybe if it was too dark to see it, then it didn't count against me, Mr. Hobart. So you understand why I must have my room in complete darkness, you see. I was guided mostly by my knowledge of my own house and the pale moonlight that came into the now-shattered windows. Every hall I walked through, I dropped the picture frames to the floor and shattered every mirror I came across. Oh, Mr. Hobart, you would be amazed how many mirrors, windows, or picture frames a person has in their house when they could be potentially lethal. I guess it's akin to being in the path of a tornado. You suddenly see sharp objects everywhere. So I made my way to the bathroom and shattered all of the mirrors in there. I then made my way into the kitchen and took out the glass window and the window on the stove, as well as the microwave. "The others weren't as smart as me, you bastard," I screamed. "If I have to wear a blindfold for the rest of my life, you won't get me." Then I swung into the living room window, shattering it. Shards of glass flew across my arms, cutting them open. I felt sticky hot blood running down my forearms. I was leaving a trail of blood everywhere I went now. I would patch myself up after I was finished with my duties. After I was... Wait, what was that noise? I suddenly felt a hot, sticky breath on the back of my neck. I could feel it right behind me.
There is someone behind you. Don't turn around or they might find you.
I heard the voice say louder than ever, in that raspy, foul voice that I had grown to loathe. But I was wearing earplugs. How could I hear it? Oh God, it wasn't speaking into my ears. It was speaking into my brain.
There is someone.
I'm not going to turn around. You're not going to beat me, I screamed.
Someone behind you.
No, I won't let you win. As long as you don't kill me, you can't move on to another victim. I know your rules now. You're bound by your own game, you monster.
Don't turn around or they might.
I won't. I never will. But then I felt a hand grab a hold of my shoulder.
Find you!
The voice practically screamed into my skull. Dropping the bat, I spun around, breaking free of the phantom's grip. No, that's not right, I screamed. I didn't look. The phantom stood there motionless in the darkened hall. Then suddenly, it reached its hands towards me again. I screamed so loud I could hear it over my earplugs, and drew my sidearm. I lifted up my gun and began to fire into the Phantom Stalker. Flashes of light exploded from my muzzle, as shot after shot impacted the Black Phantom's chest. It stumbled backwards and collapsed to the ground. I had won! I had won! Somehow I had managed to kill a phantom, a ghost, an apparition, with bullets. That didn't seem right. As the phantom settled on the floor, I felt a terrible sensation, as though something was most horribly wrong. The phantom did not dissolve into oblivion like I thought it would. Instead, it placed its hands over its bleeding chest and began to convulse. I quickly reached towards the hallway light and flicked it on, and to my sheer terror, I could see Detective Chalmers laying on the floor, staring up at me in shock. I ripped out my earplugs and fell down next to him on the bloody floor, dropping my gun as I did. I cupped my hand under his head and lifted his face up. Tears were welling up in his eyes as he kept staring at me.
"I'm sorry, Greg. I'm sorry,"
I sobbed.
"I'm so sorry. Natalia. Why?"
Greg said. Then suddenly his body convulsed, his eyes rolled back, and he went limp. What was he doing in my house anyway? I thought, but being a detective, I already knew the answer. He came to my door and knocked on it, but I hadn't heard him. Then he saw the broken windows and the commotion going on inside, and climbed through one of the windows. He knew I was disturbed about something and wanted to save me from whatever it was. When he found me rambling like a madwoman, he probably tried to speak to me, but I couldn't hear him, so he grabbed me. With it being dark, and the state I was in, oh God, Chalmers, I'm sorry. It wasn't my fault, Mr. Hobart. You have to understand, with the state I was in, with all those circumstances working against me, I never meant to kill Craig Chalmers. It was an accident, a horrible, tragic accident. They're not going to believe you, I thought. They're going to find your house like this, with you cut up like some sort of maniac, with Craig dead on the floor, killed by your own weapon. They're going to say the case was too much for you, and you snapped. You snapped like some sort of lunatic. That's when I knew I had to get out. I patted Chalmers down and found his car keys. Then I sprinted towards my front door, unlocking it, and ran to his car that was parked nearby. I made it a point to kick off the side mirrors and rip off the rear view mirror. I wasn't going to chance seeing it and letting it win. Of course, I knew this was going to look really bad, Mr. Hobart. I wondered where I was even going to go. My brothers? My ex? They would find me no matter where I went. I was a detective, after all. I knew how they operated. Turning on the car, I groaned when it acted like it wasn't going to turn over. As I turned the key, the car continued to rev, but it wouldn't start. Oh, damn it, Chalmers. I know we don't get paid that much, but you could have at least kept your car in better condition. Pumping the gas and giving one final go at it, the car finally roared to life. I peeled out of my driveway and began to speed down the country roads. As I flew down those windy, dark roads, all the trees around me began to take on a sinister appearance. The branches seemed to point at me accusingly. Murderer, psychopath, deranged, they seemed to be saying. What was I going to do? What could I do? My career was over. There was no way I was going to get away with this. Not just my career. I was going to jail after this. I took a sharp corner on another side road and kept driving. Though I had no idea where I was heading, I just knew I had to escape. I had to go somewhere, anywhere but here. Then once again I felt that horrible, hot, sticky breath on the back of my neck.
There is someone behind you. Don't turn around, or they might find you.
Oh, just leave me alone, I cried, tears streaming down my cheeks. Please just leave me alone. Haven't you taken enough from me already? I could look at it. I could just get it over with. No, that thing was going to ruin my life. I would ruin its afterlife. It would be stuck with me forever. Or at least a very long time until I died of old age. As long as I'd lived, it couldn't hurt anyone else, and that gave me some comfort. I glanced over at the dashboard. Greg Chalmers' glasses were there. He always took them off around me because he thought he looked like a dork with them on. Poor Greg. I still can't believe. Wait. The glasses. Oh no, not the glasses. In the glasses, I could see my own reflection driving, and right behind me, sitting in the back seat, was the Phantom Stalker, its black talon-like hands wrapping around my neck. No! I screamed, jerking hard on the wheel, even as I felt the demon's icy-cold grip around my throat. Turning too hard, the car suddenly turned on its side and flew through the air. It spun around repeatedly, my entire world a chaotic whirlwind. And then, I felt myself crash into a tree, and all went dark. Merciful darkness. Natalia sat back on her bed, rubbing her hands across her scarred, bandaged face. And when I woke up, I was here. You believe me, don't you, Mr. Hobart? You believe I didn't kill Detective Chalmers? Not on purpose, anyway, don't you? Mr. Hobart, having listened to her story, uncrossed his legs, then leaned forward, placing a reassuring hand on Natalia's leg.
Of course, my dear. I believe you,
he said calmly. Oh, thank heavens you do. Natalia sighed.
Yes, I believe you believe what you said.
Hobart then rose from his chair. It doesn't matter. I know what the newspapers are saying about me. But don't you find it odd that there hasn't been another murder since I was brought here?
No, not at all, actually,
he said as he made his way to the cell door. He knocked a few times on it before glancing back at Natalia. You think I was the strangler, don't you, Hobart?
I don't know. Do you think you are the strangler, Natalia?
You're just like Dr. Bernstein, with your psycho babble and double talk. Natalia snapped up harshly. Just because you call yourself Mr. Hobart doesn't mean I don't know who you really are, Doctor.
Get some rest, Natalia. You will be needing it for tomorrow,
Dr. Hobart said as the doors were opened by a security guard. Why? What happens tomorrow? Natalia said, concerned.
Just get some rest, my dear,
Hobart said, smiling back at her. Then he walked out the door. It doesn't matter how long you keep me here, Natalia screamed at Hobart as the door closed behind him. It doesn't matter how long it takes. As long as I'm alive, that thing can't hurt anyone else. So as long as I'm trapped, it's trapped. You understand? It's trapped in here with me. Natalie Zamora continued to scream and rant, even as Dr. Hobart closed the door to her cell and locked it behind him. Hobart glanced down the long white hallway and could see Dr. Bernstein was making his way towards him.
So, what do you think, Dr. Hobart? Bernstein said. Do you see why I called you now?
Indeed.
Dr. Hobart said, removing his glasses from his pockets and placing them on his head, like he would have left them out on the request of a murdering psychopath.
Well, what are your thoughts on her, then?
Straightening his glasses, Hobart smiled his professional, fake smile that he used with his more disturbed patients.
I think Miss Amory is a deeply disturbed and delusional individual. She invented this Phantom Stalker as a way to cope with murdering her partner, and I suspect she might have had a hand in the Westport murders as well.
Bernstein nodded in agreement.
Well, that seems to be the general consensus of the Westport Police Department and the media, seeing as there hasn't been another murder in, well, 4 months now, exactly, since the date we incarcerated her. So now that you have met her, what do you suggest we do for treatment?
Dr. Hobart grinned at hearing this.
Well, I've already cleared this with the higher-ups. Tonight we're going to have one of the cells covered in bulletproof glass mirrors. Then tomorrow we're going to transfer Miss Amory into the cell and leave her in there with the lights on until she can overcome her phobia of lights and mirrors.
Hobart said, almost gleefully.
Are you sure that's such a good idea? I mean, you saw the security tape and how she reacted when she was first brought in.
Bernstein protested.
Ah, Dr. Bernstein, as you should know, the first step into accepting what she did is to disperse this Phantom Stalker delusion. Trust me. You'll see tomorrow. She may freak out for a day or so, but in the end she'll have no choice but to accept what she did. Now, if you'll excuse me, I want to go home and be with my family now. After encountering a disturbed monster such as herself, I want the comfort of the sane.
Well, I'll be thanking you kindly for your time, Dr. Hobart, Bernstein said, shaking Dr. Hobart's hand, and with that, the two doctors made their way down the hall and out of the asylum. Meanwhile, inside cell D24, Natalie Zamori sat in the darkness of her room. Behind her, she could feel the thick, hot breath of the Phantom Stalker, as it sang to her a lullaby she had heard every night for months now.
There is someone behind you. Don't turn around, or they might find you.
The end. March 15th, 2010. Sean Parker Storytelling.